Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ragawanti, for the opening remarks. And now I think without further ado, I will turn the time to Dr. Willy Renandia, our first speaker for the day. I think everybody knows Pak Willy, but let me introduce him to you all for brief. Okay. So Dr. Willy Renandia is a language teacher educator with extensive teaching experience in Asia. I think not only in Asia, Pak Willy, but also around the world. So he currently teaches applied linguistics courses at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And he has given more than 100 keynote presentations at international ELT conferences and has published extensively in the area of second language education. And his publications include Language Teaching Methodology, an anthology of current practice published in 2002 by Cambridge University Press, and Student-Centered Cooperative Learning in 2019, 2019 by Springer International. And he maintains a large teacher professional development forum called Teacher Voices that I think everybody here, most of you are familiar with. And he has a website called Willy's ELT Corner that, to the best of my observation, discusses many recent issues on ELT and also provides us with many valuable tips, especially for language teachers and educators. So I think, Dr. Renandia, the screen is now yours. And for information,
Yes.
you have 25 minutes to present here, Pak Willy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pak Calvin, if you could ask the participants to turn on the video camera very briefly, just for 10 seconds, so that I can say hello to them. Pak
Everybody.
Romo.
Okay, everybody, could you please turn on
very
the
briefly.
video just for 10 seconds so that Pak Willy
can... 10 seconds so that I can say hello to you. And also, maybe I can also greet you in your language. Magandang umaga if you're from the Philippines. And selamat, magandang umaga is selamat is morning. This is afternoon. I haven't learned that word yet. I think there are people from China, from Vietnam, and also from other places as well. Please have your camera on throughout if you can, so that I can look at you and I can ask you questions as well during my presentation. Bapak Ibu, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, just very briefly, this is my university. The name of the university is Nanyang Technological University, and I work at the School of Education, locally known as the National Institute of Education. Just for those of you from Indonesia, my university and my Institute of Education is one of the few LPDP and BPI approved university. If you are trying to get a scholarship from the Indonesian government, I think you may just be able to consider applying for admission into my university. Okay, my topic today, just give me 1 second. I can't seem to see you on my screen. I wonder why. Let me just try again. When I have my slides on, all of you disappeared from my screen. Let me try one more time, see if I can see you now. Okay, just give me 1 second. Oh, you're gone again. I wonder why. Okay, anyway, I have 3 things that I want to share with you. The first one is I will briefly talk about why reading is important and why reading can be an excellent way for you to teach critical thinking skills to your students. But first off, I will talk about the benefits of reading and why reading is important for your students' language development and also for your students' overall literacy development. And then point number 2, I will talk a little bit about, what actually reading involves in terms of helping students develop their linguistic processes, also known as lower order processes, and also how reading is associated with higher order thinking processes. So in terms of reading, we are talking about two things. Number one is lower, order thinking processes and higher order thinking processes. It's the higher order thinking processes that are very important if we are serious in, teaching our students how to think more critically when they read or when they listen to presentation by people. And point number 3, now this is the most important part, but also the most difficult part for us to appreciate. Research tells us actually that teaching critical thinking is really hard work. It's not easy to teach critical thinking, and more importantly, it's really difficult for us to help our students become more critical thinkers. And we'll discuss this in greater details in my presentation. So bear with me. First off, let me just very briefly mention or point out some of the most important benefits of reading. In other words, why reading is good for you, why reading is good for your family, why reading is good for your children or for your students in school. I have some here on my screen, and I'm sure you can relate to these benefits quite readily. Point number 1, reading is enjoyable, it's relaxing. If you're having a difficult day, maybe reading can be a stress buster for you. I think you can be more relaxed when you read, a good novel, at home. In addition to that, research also tells us that reading can increase your linguistic knowledge, your word power tremendously. Students who read a great deal actually develop their vocabulary knowledge, and they can then make use of this knowledge in order for them to read more, to understand more, and to be able to make sense of information that they read in their reading materials in school, or maybe in their independent reading as well. The next point is this, that reading is important in increasing your knowledge base. And later, I will keep on repeating this, that knowledge is so fundamental that without a very strong knowledge base, it's extremely difficult for you to teach critical thinking skills to your students. And you may have seen somewhere that reading also can improve your soft skills, because you know a lot of things, a lot of places, a lot of historical facts, a lot of places. When you have a conversation with people, I think you can engage them in a very interesting discussion about issues related to the economic situations, the political situations, and other things related to life and also to education. Most important, perhaps, for many of us in the audience is this, that reading, doing a lot of reading on a regular basis, reading daily over time can actually improve students' academic achievement in school. Their literacy scores will go up, and also their ability to comprehend information becomes much, much better. Let me show you some empirical evidence. Time and again, I think this graph represents what people understand about the relationship between socioeconomic status and reading achievement. Children coming from lower socioeconomic status tend to have low reading achievement. On the other hand, children coming from high socioeconomic status or middle socioeconomic status tend to score high on reading tests. So this is one important piece of fact that we have learned from research. We also know this. Now, this is another important point that we need to remember, that students who spend a lot of time reading also tend to become better in their reading scores. And this achievement in reading scores get translated into higher performance in the school situations or in the school context. Now, here is what happens if we put these two graphs together, and you will see something really, really magical. But keep in mind that socioeconomic status is a key factor influencing students' reading achievement. And point number 2, reading engagement is a key factor also in improving, in influencing students' reading or literacy achievement. Here is what happened if you put them together. Now, this graph is a little bit complicated, But what I'm going to show you, highlight to, is this. Look at the white box on the right-hand side. That is the performance of students coming from the lower socio-economic status, and compare that with students who are from higher economic status, but they don't spend a lot of time doing a lot of reading. So you can see here that socioeconomic status, which is a very powerful factor in influencing students' reading achievement, can be sort of negated, if and only if students are given a lot of opportunities to do a lot of reading. So the key message here is that reading is good. Doing a lot of reading is very, very good. And if you do that, chances are very high that students, even those coming from the socioeconomic status, the low socioeconomic status, might be able to do well in school in improving their literacy scores. Very important for places like Indonesia, for example, where students' literacy score tends to be very low. And one of the reasons is that they don't spend a lot of time doing a lot of reading. In my next presentation, the next part, I'll be looking more deeply at two types of processes that are involved in reading, which I would call the lower order thinking processes and the higher order thinking processes. Here is what we have learned from research. So point number one to remember is this, that reading is a linguistic process. Yeah, reading is a process of recognizing words. Reading is a process of reading group of words together, so that you are reading not word by word, but you'll be reading, in a phrase group or in a clause group. Reading is also about reading the whole text, not just reading a sentence, not just reading a paragraph, but also reading the whole story. So in that sense, reading is known as a linguistic process. Language is the most important criterion here. Yeah. And students will have to do this fairly quickly so that they become very good at recognizing the words. They become very good at reading at the sentence level. They will become very efficient at reading at the text level. But this is going to take quite a bit of time, especially for those who are not used to doing a lot of reading. And this can take quite a bit of time for them to develop. Yeah. So the question is, what does research tell us about how these processes can be, done quickly, efficiently, and effortlessly? Usually, the process involves 3 stages. The first part is attending, understanding, knowing what the word is and how the words combine with other words in a sentence or in a clause, and how these sentences then form a paragraph and the whole story. The first part involves attending or paying attention. The second part involves doing, practice, proceduralizing what you have just learned in the first step. But the next part, which takes a lot of time, is known as automatizing. You have to do it so often that you become very good at it, so that you can do it without thinking. You can do it effortlessly. So this essentially is what is involved in the very first process of developing linguistic processes in reading. I think that is pretty straightforward, yeah? Now, the second part that we need to understand is this. Reading is also a comprehension process. Yeah, but the word comprehension is often misunderstood, because one of the meaning of comprehension actually is this, that reading is a meaning-making process. What I'm saying here is that meaning is not always in the text. Meaning is in the text, but meaning is also in your head or in your student's head. And that is what meaning-making process actually means. Yeah, in a very simple sentence, in order for you to get meaning from the text, in order for your students to get meaning from the text, they will need to bring meaning into it. Let me just give you an example. Yeah. Daisy, are you still there? Oh, Deborah, are you still there? Deborah? Deborah, are you still there? Okay, here is a conversation between a teacher and a student, and the student's name happened to be Ibu Deborah. Deborah, if you have $5 and you ask your mom to give you another $5, how many dollars would you have? Deborah, are you still there? And Deborah says, $5, no more, no less. And the teacher says, you don't know your maths. Deborah says, you don't know my mom. If you understand this, that means that you are making use of what you know in your head in order for you to make sense of what is happening in this anecdote or in this small humorous text. Yeah, so again, meaning is in the text, but meaning is also in the head. Here is another example. Now, this one is for Pak Agus. Pak Agus Santoso is from Jakarta. How come you fail your grammar tests? And Agus says to the father, absent, Dad. And the dad then continues, you were absent on the test day? Oh, no, Dad. So what's the problem? So it's the girl who sits next to me. She was absent on that day. Now, if you laugh at this, that means that you understand, the hidden meaning or the meaning that is not mentioned in the text, but you still was able to understand this because you were able to add meaning into the text. I hope I'm making sense there. So reading is a meaning-making process. It's in the text, but it's also in your head. Another important point, now this is also related to how we develop our deeper understanding of a piece of text, but we can also learn to be a bit more critical when we read a piece of information from a text. So what we have here is that reading is a group meaning-making process. Yes, reading alone is good, but reading with a group of people, reading and then talking about what you have read and discussing it with other people can further enhance the meaning-making process. In other words, your understanding will become more enhanced and more nuanced, perhaps, and more extended. Yeah, so reading with others can help you understand things at a much more deeper level. So meaning is not just in the text, meaning is in your head, but meaning is also in other people's heads. And if you make use of this, chances are very high that you'll be able to understand the text at a much deeper level, and perhaps helping you to see things from a different perspectives, from a different angle. And that is one of the features of somebody who is critical in their reading. Another important process that we need to appreciate is this, that reading is a purposeful process. Yeah. There has to be a certain purpose why a piece of text is written. Yeah. What is the reason why a text is written, and who wrote the text, for which audience, and in what particular context? Now, these things are not usually communicated to the students in the classroom. Yeah. So typically in the classroom context, we are more concerned with teaching vocabulary, teaching grammar, maybe teaching reading skills and strategies. And most important, perhaps for most teachers, is to help the students to answer comprehension questions. Yeah. But we do know that text, a piece of text, are always socially constructed. Yeah. There's a purpose. It's to inform, to persuade, or maybe to mislead you. With social media today, I think you will be able to see a lot of examples of how people, purposefully try to mislead you into believing that something is good when it is actually not a very good thing. The audience, yeah, who is the audience for the text? Is it the general audience? Is it people in education, people in business, lower or middle income group of people, and so on and so forth? Understanding this will help our students become more careful and more discerning in their reading, and more critical as well. And finally, the context. Yeah, is it in the classroom? Is it outside the classroom? Is it at home? Is it something that is written in a newspaper or in other context? And finally, the social media just makes things really, really difficult for us, for our students, for that matter, to become critical and discerning in their reading. One of the reasons is that social media is free. People can write about anything. There is no screening. There's nobody screening or editing what you are going to put in your social media. And that makes critical thinking even more important. Again, but the key thing here is, I think we need to teach our students that, a text is not neutral. A text is socially constructed. A text is very often ideologically laden with, important messages and sometimes misleading messages that the author is trying to say, communicate to the readers. If I were to show you this piece of text, how would you judge this piece of text? Is it trustworthy? Is it, factual? Is it informative? Is what you see there is what you get if you buy this drink? Pak Josh, are you there? Can you use a microphone, Pak Josh?
Yes.
Very good. Finally, I can hear some voice because I can't see your foot. I can't see your picture on my screen. I don't know why suddenly all of this disappeared. But Josh, yes, if you see something like this, yeah, keeping in mind that, a piece of text like this is produced for a specific purpose, for a specific audience, for a specific context. And because of that, the language that is used is also very special, right? So how do we take this? How do we make sense of this? Very tricky, yeah?
Yeah, very tricky.
Very tricky, because the purpose here is for the audience, for the potential customers to get, a bottle of this drink. Yeah, whether or not this drink actually is useful and has a lot of vitamins in it is another issue. Yeah, but the purpose is for people to be interested and to buy this drink. Now, if I were to show you a website like this, but Josh, back to you. I'm very happy to hear your voice. If I were to show you a text like this is taken from a website actually. It's about 3 octopus. If you look at the format, the language that is used there, yeah, and the academic language that is used, I think you'll get the impression that this is legitimate, this is authentic, right? Mm-hmm. But in reality, there's nothing like a tree octopus. Octopus does not live on trees, But if you're not very careful, and when you read this, without understanding, the reason behind this, I think it's very easy for you to fall into believing that this is a very good piece of information. Yeah. Okay. Next point about reading. We're still into reading here. That reading is a proficiency building process. Very important for those of you in the audience. If you teach students of weaker, lower proficiency, research tells us very clearly that reading is a great source of language input, and reading is a proficiency booster. And what it means essentially is that students who read a great deal also develop higher level of English language proficiency in terms of reading, in terms of speaking, writing, and vocabulary and grammar as well. Yeah. So these are some instances of references that you might want to look at if you want to be more convinced about how reading can develop your students' proficiency in the English language, or even in Bahasa Indonesia, or whatever languages that the students are developing in the school context. Number 4, so we have looked at reading as the linguistic process, yeah, reading as a meaning-making process, and then also reading as a what was that, the other one? Reading as a proficiency building process. The 4th one, which is closely related to critical reading, discerning reading, is this. Yeah. So on top of the earlier 3 processes, I think literacy experts believe that reading is also an evaluative process. So the onus is on the readers to read, to understand, to believe, and not to believe what is presented in the text. Now, this is where the readers will have to take a critical stand and be able to ask questions and understand both the stated and the implied meaning of the text. Yeah, the readers will have to ask questions like, is the information facts or is it based on opinions? Does the writer write the text from a certain philosophical perspectives, from certain biological perspective? Whether the information presented in the text is believable, credible, and things like that. Now, this is something that we also need to teach in our reading lesson to help the students become more discerning and to become more, critical as well. It's a lot of things that the students will need in order for them to be able to evaluate a piece of text critically for that purpose. I think what we need to do is what sort of knowledge and skills and dispositions are needed. Is it enough for us to just teach these things to our students in the classroom? I think the answer is probably not enough. Yeah, point number one, and let me say this again, students need a very strong word knowledge, and they also need to have a wide world knowledge. Without these two, critical reading is just not possible. Point number two, we also need to develop their critical thinking skills. Things like questioning the author, not just believing everything that is presented in the text. They need to be asking questions. Is the author credible? What is his or her qualification, for example? And it also falls upon the reader to double check, to trace the source of information presented in the text. Who is the author? What are their credentials? What is the source of the text? Is the author biased? What is missing and not presented by the author in that particular text? How can I verify the content? So asking all these questions can be very useful when you teach reading, when you teach critical thinking in the classroom. Yeah. Perhaps more important than that is our willingness to open up the learning space, to allow the students to, or to, for us to create a more thinking culture in the school context. Like in the classroom, for example, stop asking multiple choice questions. That's a very bad thing, because if you believe critical thinking is important, I think you should ask a lot more open-ended questions. The kind of questions that would allow for divergent answers, not just a single answer. I think you need to be more tolerant in terms of accepting different responses from your students. You should also be open when the students question your answers, when when the students challenge conventional wisdom and all that. I think you need to be more open to accepting different or divergent answers for the students. And for that, I think we need to go back to the quality of the teacher. Are you an open-minded teacher? Are you a lifelong learner? Are you a good listener? Surprise, surprise. Many of us, including me, are not very open-minded. I'm just learning to be more open-minded, now. And I'm also trying to learn to be more, engage in developing further information as a lifelong learner. And I also try very hard to become a more, a better listener at home and also in the classroom as well. So these are the 4 or 5 reading processes. Yeah, keep in mind, all these are very important. The first part, the second, and the third will have to be in place. These are so foundational. Without, the first 3 linguistic processes, I think reading, critically becomes really difficult for our students. Yeah. So once the first 3 processes are in place, then we can move on and begin talking about the purpose for which a text is written. And that is when we can start teaching our students to be more discerning by, going through the text with a more critical mind. In other words, reading, looking at reading as an evaluative process. The last part, Calvin, give me 2 or 3 minutes and I'll be done very quickly.
Yeah,
yeah?
sure. Yes,
Yes.
okay.
Now, this is the most important part. Many of us believe that critical thinking is important. I too believe that critical thinking is important, but surprisingly and frustratingly perhaps, that critical thinking is very, very difficult to teach. I think we need to appreciate that fact. Research tells us that many of us have not been successful in creating, a critical thinking culture in our school. We have not been successful in helping our students become more critical and more discerning in their reading or in their, engagement with textual information, whether it is written or orally presented. Now, here are some of the reasons. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier on. Now, if you are interested, please Google this article. The title is Knowledge Matters. And this piece of article was written by a cognitive scientist. And he has been looking at the importance of critical thinking, and he's been trying to understand why critical thinking is very, very difficult to teach. And one of the theses that he has is that knowledge is a foundation. Without sufficient knowledge, you cannot think critically. Yeah. Now, this is important if you deal with students, of low literacy, both in L1 and L2. Teaching critical thinking is just not possible. Maybe only to a small extent, yeah. Number two, poor knowledge base. Yes, many of our students are not, have a very small knowledge base. And because of that, when they read for information, they tend to just believe everything that is presented in the text. And point number three, this is very interesting. Critical thinking turns out to be domain specific. If you know a lot about football, for example, yeah, you can be very critical when you watch people playing football. Yeah. If you ask me, for example, a question about extensive reading, because I know a lot about extensive reading, I think I'll be able to tell you, things that is empirically validated and things that is still not, considered an established fact within the extensive reading domain. If you send me a proposal, research proposal on extensive reading, for example, I can very quickly point out, hey, there's something here that is missing. There's something here that is just not correct. Yeah, that critical thinking is possible because I know a lot of that, domain knowledge. Let's just have some example about Joseph. I'm sorry.
Yes, probably.
Yes. Okay. Now here's a video that I came across recently. So the idea, that the person is trying to get across to the audience, the YouTube audience is, well, if you want to learn English, you have to think in English. My question to you is this good advice or bad advice? Just good advice or bad advice?
Well, it depends on how you view it. I think personally, it's not that good because
it's not that good. It's bad advice.
hesitant.
Yes, I think you're hesitant to say. I think you're pretty much with me. It's bad advice. You can't think in English when you are still learning English. You can't. It's just not possible. Now, here's another one. Master all 12 English tenses in 20 minutes, yes or no?
Impossible.
Exactly. Yeah. If you don't have a lot of knowledge about, the English language, then you may just believe what this person is saying in that video. It is just, number one, not possible. And number two, it's probably not the most productive way of spending your time, not even 20 minutes. Yeah. So mastering English tenses in 20 minutes is just not possible and not a good idea. But Josh, another question for you. If you show this to your typical students at Satya Wacana University, and if you ask them, what is this, infographic is trying to tell us, do you think they'll be able to do this?
No, it's not fair. Yeah, I showed this to some of my students. It's not fair. How can you measure me with the same criteria for everyone? It doesn't fit into anybody's liking or competence.
Yeah. The point I want to get across is this. If you don't know much about education, then this may be a bit difficult to understand. I think this is about appreciating diversity when we teach, and also appreciating diversity when we assess our students. So there's no one size fits all, basically, yeah? But unless you have that knowledge in your head, it's very, very difficult for you to be critical and to understand what is the hidden or the implied message of this infographic. Another important thing, this is what I've learned from reading, either the professional literature or from the general psychology, psychological books like this one. It turns out that people, you and me, tend to think very, very, very fast. And fast thinking, also known as intuitive thinking, is not good where critical thinking is concerned. Critical thinking requires that you stop, you reflect, and you try to analyze things, to see things from different perspectives. You cannot do it too quickly. And yet, our tendency as a human being is to be thinking fast, intuitive thinking. Human almost immediately when you're presented with a problem. Yeah. Now, if you are looking for something that is less technical, less academic, I would recommend that you read Malcolm Gladwell. And the title of that book is Blink. So essentially, that is what he's trying to say in that novel, that people try to think so fast, it's like a blink of the eye. Very quickly, you see something, you make a decision almost immediately. And that kind of thinking is not good for people who do not have a lot of knowledge in the first place. But for people who has a lot of knowledge base, that blink actually is possible. Again, just using me as an example, I've been in education, English language education for many, many years. I can think in a blink when I'm faced with a problem related to English language teaching because I have a lot of knowledge. Yeah, that is possible. For people who have very little knowledge about ELT, for example, that fast thinking is likely to be not very useful. On top of that, now this is again something that we have learned from the literature, that the way we think is very much influenced by things that we have in our head. The halo effect, for example. These are known as cognitive biases or thinking biases. The halo effect. I think we tend to associate, for example, in academia, the word scopus, for example, is associated with something that is academic, something that is good. Yeah. My example here is a journal called Canadian Center of Science and Education. It was once indexed in Scopus, and look at the name of the publisher, Canadian Center of Science and Education. Then you put these two together, I think you fall into a trap here of what is known as the halo effect and confirmation bias. Yeah, Scopus is good, Canada is good, then this journal must be good. It's very, very easy for people to fall into the trap here. Yeah, so be careful of the biases that you may not be aware are influencing the way you think, the way you solve problem, and the way you try to read with critical eye. Groupthink bias, that is another well-reported bias that people have. People tend to go with the crowd. If a lot of people say that something is good, then you tend to be influenced and say that, yes, that thing is good. Now, in academia, for example, people with, a lot of citation counts are usually, considered very well-cited individuals, and that person must be very popular, and that person must be very good. And when that happens, you sort of stop, being critical of what that person is saying in his research, although what he is saying may not be a wonderful thing. And finally, things like gender bias may influence the way you assess information and the way you make a conclusion based on your reading. For example, men and women are not created equal, for example. And when you read a piece of article written by women, then you tend to be thinking in a certain way. If the information is written by a female, by a male academic, then you may be thinking in a certain way. So these are biases that we need to be aware of. And if you do that, then you may just be at the starting point of becoming a more discerning and critical readers. To conclude, I've shared with you 3 important points about reading. First, the benefits of reading. And number 2, the processes of reading. And number 3, more importantly, a good understanding of why critical thinking is difficult, why critical thinking is hard to teach and also to learn. Maybe one important takeaway, if you want to start thinking and creating a good thinking culture in your school context, this is a piece of advice that is probably a very good way to start. Yeah, ask your students to think more slowly, basically. Ask them to stop, ask them to think before they make any conclusion, before they make any decision. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Renandia. I think we have many insightful ideas from this presentation. And audience, please join me to give virtual claps to Dr. Willy.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to respond to 1 or 2 questions from the audience before we move on with the next presentation by Dr. Daisy Tan.
Okay. Sorry, I think I was kicked. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. One or 2 questions, perhaps from.
Yes, there are 2 or 3 people who raised their hands.
Yeah. I'll just ask Luma Dedui to activate your microphone and ask your questions directly, please. Thank you.
Yes, Ibu Made, Dwi.
Oh.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you for the nice presentation. I think there are also so many Indonesian teacher and participant in here, and also
Yeah.
maybe the teacher and lecturers from the other countries. Okay, just wondering about the critical thinking that we have in Indonesian curriculum that recently known as Merdeka curriculum. Yeah, it's related with your presentation just now, Mr. And then there is a question, just like me as a teacher, as a lecturer, and also as a mother. Yeah, as we know that in Indonesia, the students start to learn English in general in junior high school.
Yes.
Start in junior high school.
Yes.
And then I learned also as the younger students learn English also. But how to we as a teacher make them think
yes, I think I understand your
like
question.
reading and think critically.
Yes, Ibu Dewi, thank you so much for your question. I think I understand.
Mr.
Yes. My advice, if you want to teach critical thinking to your students, do it in Bahasa Indonesia. Don't do it in English. If their level of English proficiency is very low, it's difficult, if not impossible, for them to just understanding is difficult enough for them in Bahasa Inggris, in English. If that is already difficult, asking them to go deeper into the text, making use of their critical thinking skills becomes just impossible. So if you ask me, do it later, when the students have already had sufficient proficiency in the English language, then you can teach that in Bahasa Inggris. But before that, I think my suggestion is for you to teach critical thinking in Bahasa Indonesia, and also invite the other teachers in the school to also pay attention, to also start teaching critical thinking in when they teach, the sciences, when they teach history, when they teach social studies and all that. Yeah, it is not our only job as an English teacher to teach critical thinking skills. And maybe Bahasa Inggris is not the best way for us to teach critical thinking because our students are still at the very low end of the proficiency level. Ya, jadi ada hubungan yang sangat, there's a very big relationship between language and thinking. If your language is weak in the first place, then thinking in that language becomes difficult. Thank you so much, Ibu. Are you from Bali, Ibu? Are you from Bali? Yes, you're from Bali. Thank you.
Okay. All right, but Willie, perhaps one more question, yeah, from
Yes.
Gafar. Gafar, could you please unmute yourself and turn on your video and ask the question directly?
Oh, he's not there.
Gafar, are you there?
No, he's not there. Yes, another question, please.
Oh, Gafar is there, Willie.
Actually, good afternoon,
Yes.
everyone.
Yes,
Mr.
question.
Daniel, this is Habib from Pakistan. Currently, I'm in Cambodia working as a science and math teacher. My question is, my students also facing about reading and dictation, spellings. They can't memorize, they can't spell nicely.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest about
Yes, I think you need to strengthen their language skills first. And the best way, if you ask me, the best way to
language?
Strengthen students' language proficiency, spelling, writing, speaking, and so on and so forth is through reading. Yeah, first reading very, very easy books. But they have to do it on a daily basis. They have to do it every day.
Thank you.
And then gradually increase the level of sophistication of their reading. So reading is or has been shown to be the most powerful way of increasing students' literacy. Now, this is true in the students' first language. So in the Philippines, for example, that will be increasing, strengthening students' proficiency in the Filipino language, maybe. In Indonesia, it has to be the first thing that you need to do. You know, strengthening, improving the proficiency of your students' Bahasa Indonesia. Bapak Ibu sekalian, ladies and gentlemen from Indonesia, surprise, surprise, a lot of Indonesian people do not have a very good grasp of Bahasa Indonesia. Oral, yes. Written Bahasa, not good. They may be able to read the sentence, they may be able to read the text, but their comprehension, their ability to make inferences, they are not very good at meaning making yet. Yeah, their language is weak. Their knowledge is also not very strong. Now, these are two very important combinations. Without these two, thinking becomes really, really nearly impossible. Yeah, but some of you may be saying, well, my students do a lot of reading in social media. Is that a good thing?